Searching for Answers. We're glad you're on board with us for this program where we work our way through the sacred text, sentence by sentence, verse by verse, trying to understand what it meant when it was originally written and what implications it bears in our lives today. We're continuing to work our way through Amos. We're glad you're with us on that. Amos, the earliest of those dozen little, we call them minor prophets, but they're major messages, aren't they? Mm-hmm. These are powerful words they've got going. So find Amos in the Old Testament, and we'll get started. Dr. Bernard Taylor, research professor in the School of Religion here at Loma Linda University. Dr. Leo Ranzelin, New Testament professor and associate dean of the School of Religion here, Loma Linda University. My name is John Jones, La Sierra University, and here we go. We're getting right into chapter 5 here now, having looked at some painful words where God speaks out of love, but nonetheless has some strongly worded admonitions and reproval for his people, God's people of Judea and Israel, but focusing particularly on the northern kingdom, Israel. You people, you're oppressing, you're crushing down, you're exploiting, you're behaving in greedy ways. This is not the way the kingdom works. Start representing the kingdom in the world, is in effect the message that they're hearing, and it is in some ways important for us still today. So, Leo, what version are you reading to us out of?
From the New Revised Standard.
New Revised Standard. We use a variety of them, but that's probably the one that we come back to most often, isn't it? If you are of a mind to buy a new Bible and don't have the NRSV, we would recommend that to you. It's not perfect, being a human product, but it carries I think the translation is pretty accurate in most places, isn't it? So here we go. Hear the word. I'll let you take us from there and get us going. Chapter 5, verse 1 and following.
Okay. Hear this word that I take up over you in lamentation, O house of Israel. Fallen, no more to rise, is maiden Israel, forsaken on her land, with no one to raise her up. For thus says the Lord God, the city that marched out 1,000 shall have 100 left, and that which marched out 100 shall have 10 left.
Now, when we speak of a terrible combat with high casualties, we say that the force was decimated. Well, that means you lost 1 out of 10.
Right.
Here, it's the other way around, isn't it? 90% of the military strength that they're relying on to rule over surrounding nations, 9 out of 10 destroyed and only 10% remaining. That is unheard of.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible story. But it is a way of saying, look, you people think that you're so powerful and that you've got so much military might, you can do whatever you want and you don't have to answer to anybody. Right. You don't have to even care. You can force your will upon them. God says, you can do that to your neighbors. You can't do it to me.
And earlier in chapter 2, 13 through 16, he had spoken about basically defeating and decimating Israel's army, where the swift and the strong and the mighty and those who rode horses and the stout of heart, they were going to be defeated in a profound way and on the day, says the Lord. And so once again, as you noted here in 5:3, the defeat of Israel's military is highlighted, this aspect of their security. But I'm most attracted to, well, I shouldn't say attracted, but verse 2 I just find so dramatic and striking. And what a rhetorical flourish, where here, I imagine myself at temple at Bethel or Gilgal, and the Israelites enjoying economic prosperity, territorial expansion, military security under Jeroboam II. And now Amos comes up with a funeral dirge essentially, right? A funeral lament, fallen, no more to rise. And virgin or maiden Israel. And that phrase there about Israel suggests this young girl in the prime of her life with so much potential, so much more that she could have achieved and accomplished. Her life is brought to a close. Again, a dramatic way to underscore the finality of the northern kingdom of Israel.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in verse 2, the fallen, I think, is fallen by the sword. This is military, and then in verse 3 we have the stats on decimation.
Right.
And in terms of verse 2, what, 30, 40 years max, probably from this point in time, Israel is taken captivity by Assyria.
Right.
Not Syria and Damascus, but up and around the Fertile Crescent. The Assyrian Empire takes the northern kingdom captive. They don't take them all, that's too efficient. You take the creme de la creme, you take the leaders, those who are in a position, and the practice then also was to bring in other nations as well to avoid having any one group dominant enough to be able to lord it over the others, and then you didn't have to worry about going back and repeating what you've just done.
This aspect of lamentation and mourning seems to be a rhetorical feature that Amos employs, not just here, but as we're going to see in verse 16, right? All the squares there shall be wailing, and all the streets they shall say, alas, alas. They're going to call farmers to mourning, those skilled in lamentation to wailing.
The professional mourners.
Right, to underscore the finality of Israel's demise, this wailing lamentation, this dirge. Really makes an impression. In a dramatic way on the people of what's coming.
A lamentation.
And then before the chapter is out, we have, therefore I'll take you into exile beyond Damascus.
Right.
This is beyond Damascus is first Assyria and Nineveh, and then further down around the desert there, you come down to Babylon, the next power lining up after Assyria. It's sort of like having a clear view of the skies east of LAX, and you can see the planes coming in, tiny dots in the future, and then the distance, and then bigger dots as each plane gets nearer, and here we have...
And then they, in turn, are marched off back into the northeastern direction again, and over the horizon, and disappear.
Yes.
Disappear.
So he's talking about an adversary surrounding the land, stripping them of their defense.
Yeah.
I'm raising up against you a nation, as Dr. Taylor said, Assyria is coming. Wow, that must not have gone over too well in a time of economic prosperity and religious piety, and they think we're good.
Yeah.
Who does this prophet think he is to talk to us in those terms of exile coming our way?
Yeah, and somehow, their faithful attendance at the temple, Bethel, Gilgal, convinces them that that's got the spiritual side covered.
Right.
Yep, that they've got that in place. We have read already in chapter 4, verse 4, come to Bethel. But you come, and then you go out and you transgress again. Come to Gilgal. But then you go back out and multiply transgression. Now we read in verses 4 and 5, thus says the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. Don't seek Bethel. Don't enter into Gilgal or cross over into Beersheba, for Gilgal shall surely go into exile and Bethel come to nothing. It's a kind of, this sandwich sort of structure. Bethel, Gilgal, Beersheba, Gilgal, Bethel. You know, you work your way in and work your way back out again. A, B, C, B, A kind of structure, isn't it?
Right.
But the point is that you think that you can somehow buy God off by going through the rituals, by maintaining the ceremonial procedures and gestures. That doesn't work. Gilgal is going to go into exile. Not merely you, but Gilgal. Bethel will turn into nothing. Yeah? Bethel, nothing. Yeah? Thus says the Lord to the house of Israel, don't seek these places of alternative worship of one kind or another. Seek me. That's all. Seek me and live. And we are going to see that again in verse 6. Seek the Lord and live.
Yeah.
There's the key. You want life. You think you've got life, but it's a profligate life and an oppressive life, a greedy life. Right. That's not really living.
No.
Seek me and live. Yeah.
After the stats we've had in verses 2 and 3, the statistics, you come to verse 4, for thus says the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. After a blanket statement with enormous consequences, there is this message of hope. And some commentators believe that this can't have been in there because either God is for them or he's not.
Right.
But here is the offering of a message of hope. For thus says the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me and live. And this is in the first person, seek me.
Yeah.
But in verse 6, seek the Lord and live, and I believe we are listening to Amos. Applying what Yahweh has just said. And what would be the equivalent today in the 21st century? Where don't you go, and where do you go? And how do we seek him and live today? There is this message of hope. It's date stamped. It's not going to be for a long time. But God is on record as offering them an alternative and being willing to accept it.
Still and yet. After all that looks so final about the divine judgment and rejection of them based on their rejection of God, still and yet there is still that final summons and call that comes through. That's typical, isn't it?
Another potential way of seeing this, and this is kind of how I see it, because I'm a bit puzzled by this motif of hope in the midst of the overarching chapters 3 through 6, these indictments of Israel's sins, is could it be that these are appeals to the faithful remnant in the midst of the northern kingdom of Israel? Folks, remain steadfast, continue to seek Yahweh. Don't go to these places in which empty, meaningless ritual is taking place, Bethel and Gilgal, because you're not going to find authentic expression of Israel's faith there. And so I see these verses here, in light of the context, perhaps an appeal to the faithful remnant. Remain steadfast. Continue to seek Yahweh as I bring about this cleansing, this chastisement, this purification of my sinful people, which will be exile. That's, I think, another way of looking at these passages as a reference to a minority, an encouragement to them. Hang in there, be faithful and steadfast.
Yeah, really, it's amazing, and it does cause the scholars a problem just because of that juxtaposition when it sounds so final. But the fact of the matter is, all 12 of these prophets, there is always still the door is cracked open.
Right.
Isn't it?
Right.
No matter how final it sounds,
Yep.
again and again, there's still maybe a remnant.
Yep.
But that's what the remnant's role is, to finally avail of divine mercy after all.
And he does speak of a remnant in chapter 9, verse 8, the latter part, except I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob.
Yeah,
There's a clear reference to a remnant coming through this.
It seems to me that that's what differentiates the message to Israel, and by analogy to Judah, from the message to the Canaanites and the Moabites and all of the others. We don't hear the idea of the remnant brought out there. This is part of the chosenness, apparently, that God is indeed long-suffering beyond all reckoning, even at this point. God is on the verge of undoing all of creation, and yet.
Yep. Yeah. And I think another important point that we need to make as we walk through this material of Amos, because some of the commentators that I read is Amos is just a prophet of doom and gloom. It's just bad through and through. A subtle hint here and there of hope. And many feel that 9/11 through, 15 was a later appendage. I don't think so. But even if the overarching emphasis is upon judgment and difficult material, I think it's important to place this within the framework and context of Israel's story, of Israel's calling and election, and of God's ultimate purpose to bring Israel as his instrument to bless all peoples. And this is a moment in time in which he's having to make drastic corrective disciplinary measures to cleanse his people of their sin. It's purposeful, but with a view of bringing Israel back to have her complete and fulfill her ultimate purpose that he has for her.
Yeah. Even having paid a terrible price to get there.
So the doom and gloom needs to be placed within the context of the story of Israel, the larger story.
An ultimate goal.
Going back to 3:1 and 2. Hear this word that the Lord has spoken against you, O people of Israel, against the whole family that I brought out of the land of Egypt, brought up out of the land of Egypt. You only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities.
You are the chosen people.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I think Amos has a burden here and an important message to get across. Opportunity has a corresponding accountability.
That's right.
And they need to recognize that. Now, Northern Kingdom, it's been difficult for them because Jeroboam II took the moves to cut them off from Jerusalem and the temple and all of that, and isolated them, and
Local temples are good enough.
yes, he was afraid that he didn't have confidence in himself, and he took the steps to block off access. He took their passports every high holy day, and yes. It was difficult for them, but in the final analysis, they were accountable for the choices that they had made.
Yeah.
And we are seeing that, and will continue to see it as the text unfolds.
Yeah. Verses 6 and 7, Bernard, or you might even want to go on further if you like, as you wish. But here the language turns bitter. Wormwood is bitter, isn't it?
Yes.
So take us a little further along the way here.
Seek the Lord and live, for he will break out against the house of Israel like fire, and it will devour Bethel with no one to quench it. Ah, you that turn justice to wormwood and bring righteousness to the ground. The one who made the Pleiades and Orion and turns deep darkness into the morning and darkens the day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. Yahweh, the Lord is his name, who makes destruction flash out against the strong so that destruction comes upon the fortress.
Oh.
Yeah. As I mentioned, instead of seek me from the Lord, here is Amos saying, seek the Lord and live. Here he is reinforcing, or he will break out against the house of Joseph like fire, and it will devour Bethel with no one to quench it. And here, this chapter is the story of the three sanctuaries, the three, what's the word?
Cultic centers?
Yes, yes. And then we have you that turn justice to wormwood. Mishpat, the loyalty to the community. This is community relationship. This is not doctrinal. This is not anything like that. It is uncommon decency. It should be common decency, but it's not the case. And bring righteousness to the ground. Righteousness and justice in Hebrew and in Greek are really the one, well, here, this one is the one word. Mishpat and tzedakah, tzedek, tzedakah. And these are parallel words in the Hebrew that I used. Turn justice to wormwood. We talk about it being bitter in the mouth, and like ashes in the mouth and bitter. And then we are back to doxology with verse 8. And you can hear the participle, the one who made the Pleiades and Orion. And these were gods of the area and divided in the cycle between summer and winter.
Yeah.
The one who made the Pleiades and Orion. So for your purposes, I acknowledge that your gods exist, but he made them. And this is a common theme of the prophets, and in greater detail as time goes along. Who made the Pleiades and turns deep darkness into the morning. And here is the opposite of what we saw before, turning the morning into darkness.
In verse 13 of chapter 4.
Yeah, and darkens the day into night. And we have the advantage of a much broader view of God's plan all the way through to the book of Revelation, where finally darkness is gone. And
there's no night there.
No night there, yes. And
well, here it looks to me like the great apocalyptic end of things is actually countered with an undoing of the creation. Now, we know that the imagery of creation and of the final destruction, there are parallels between them, and oftentimes in biblical language. But here, we remind ourselves that the act of creation was a separation of the waters and the emergence of dry land. But look what happens here. God calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. In other words, we're getting back close to that chaotic situation with which Genesis opens in chapter 1, right?
and Jeremiah later will take us even further back.
Right, yes.
Jeremiah 4:23.
Yeah, we might do Jeremiah one of these times. We need to do that, don't we? So here we go. It is indeed the same God who orders and creates or can return things to chaos as they were before. God does indeed outrank the local gods of the surrounding nations who are in charge of the seasons and time of harvest and seed planting. God can supersede all of that. God is on top of all of that. What do you think, Leo?
You know, one other thing that I'm struck by in the doxology, this is the second one in 5:8, is Amos seems to be particularly astute in critiquing the social injustices that he sees. And those qualities of where humanity finds security in, fortresses, winter homes, summer homes, homes made of ivory, fortresses. He seems to want to underscore the point. You think, and the strong, right? And these attributes and qualities that you put a great deal of security in, God's going to bring them to naught. So don't think you have capacities and abilities to create anything that will provide security for you, that would allow you to escape God's justice and commitment to social justice. And yeah.
Yeah, there are more important things than your fortresses.
And the other thing,
and they are the needs of your fellow people. Yeah.
the other thing I'd like to note is a number of scholars have noted that if you want Amos in a nutshell in terms of diagnosis and remedy, 5:7, here's the diagnosis of what's really happening in Israelite society. Justice is turned to wormwood, righteousness to the ground. What's the remedy? 5:24, justice needs to roll down like waters and righteousness like
Yes,
ever-flowing
exactly
stream.
so.
Same two words are used. So it's, again, dramatic, fascinating way of problem solution.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
The means of destruction, chapter 5, verse 6, is fire. He will break out against the house of Joseph with fire. The imagery is fire. However, water also, we read in verse 8 of chapter 5, he calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out. But we also are reminded of the call to justice, which is to flow down like water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So you've got the justice and the righteousness again, Bernard, that you called our attention to as paired, but now they flow abundantly in blessing. Fire destroys, water destroys, but the blessings can flow like an ever-flowing stream as well. The imagery is powerful, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so here we are. The word of the Lord still echoes in ways that call us from our false security. It is so easy for us to look at what we've got by way of superior power, by way of security, to say, look what we've accomplished in our own way. But the problem is that that's illusory.
Yeah.
And God, I think, would have us hear the same message today and say, you are wrong to look at the work of your hands as Nebuchadnezzar was wrong and say, is this not great Babylon that I built? God says, I have a deeper message for you. And we'll get into that in further detail next time, Searching for Answers.